webinar with GitLab and NextLink Labs. Please note that today's event is being recorded and will be sent out to you via email by the latest tomorrow. My name is Lauren Roberts, and I'm a channel marketing program manager here at GitLab on our partner marketing team, and I'm thrilled to be kicking off this webinar and just want to say thank you to all of our participants who have joined. Before we get started, I just want to take a brief moment to point out some of the great features on our platform. First, besides seeing the slides and our wonderful faces of all of our presenters, you'll notice a resource panel. This is going to contain links for GitLab, NextLink Labs, and then there's also a partner microsite that's going to have really great content of GitLab and NextLink. There's videos, some case studies, one-pagers, and just really great content for you to dive into after the webinar. You'll also notice at the bottom a free trial banner. Feel free to use this, or it'll take you to a form. You can fill this out to request a free trial with GitLab and NextLink Labs. If you fill that out, you'll have information emailed to you about that free trial. There's also a question panel and a chat panel. Please enter any questions for the speakers on the Ask a Question panel, and our speaker, Jordan, will be able to answer those in the presentation. And then if you should need any technical assistance, please put that in the chat box. It'll be the quickest way to receive a response. And now that some of the housekeeping is out of the way, I want to go ahead and introduce Jordan Saunders, who is CEO and founder of NextLink Labs, to kick us off today.
All right, thanks so much, Lauren. I appreciate the introduction. So welcome everyone to our webinar. So the title of the webinar is Unlocking GitLab and Kubernetes Potential. So super excited to put this on. A little bit about me and my background. So my name is Jordan Saunders. I'm the CEO and founder over here at NextLink Labs. My background is as a software engineer and DevOps architect. So I am very technical, more on the business side these days, but do love to show individuals about new technologies and kind of spread my knowledge. So very excited to put on this webinar. We're going to be talking about GitLab and Kubernetes and just some DevOps stuff in general, which are things that really excite me throughout my career. So very excited to put this on. Before I go into that, just want to do a little bit of quick introduction on the company that I founded. So we're NextLink Labs, and so we are a digital transformation consultancy really focused on DevOps, cybersecurity, and custom software solutions. So I founded the company just because I had a passion for developing software. I worked in a lot of different companies, either as a consultant or as a full-time employee, and just felt like there's easier ways to do things, and companies need to know how to take full advantage of the technology that's out there. And so with that in mind, have built NextLink Labs. We're a proud GitLab Select partner. It's one of our favorite pieces of technology. And so, very excited to put on this webinar. So in terms of objectives for this webinar, we're going to get pretty technical, I would say. So I'd love it if people can come out of this webinar with an understanding of GitLab and GitLab CI, an understanding of Kubernetes, how they complement each other, some of the uses for some of those integration pieces like GitLab Kubernetes Agent, review environments, GitOps, things like that. So again, we're going to go into a number of different things. In terms of the agenda for this webinar, we're going to go through some slides for about the first half. Again, we're going to touch on some of these technologies at a high level. I'm sure there'll be a few questions related to these things, and I'm hopefully once we get through those slides and get into the demo, it'll make some more sense of some of these concepts. At the end, we'll do a Q&A session like Lauren said, and if there are follow-up questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to shed some light. Can only cover so much information in 30 or 45 minutes. So we're going to come in fast and furious, and then hopefully everybody will leave here learning a lot. Before we get into the individual technology pieces, I just kind of want to set the stage and really understand why this stuff is important, and really why I founded this company and why our focus is on these things, right? And so if you think about the changing business landscape, more and more companies are needing to move fast, right? They're needing to provide value to their customers, whether those are consumers, other businesses. They need to provide value to those customers, right? And they're increasingly leaning on software as that vehicle and as that key lever to deliver that value, right? And so with this, that means software is becoming increasingly valuable. And so improvements to the process that deploys that software also is becoming increasingly valuable, right? And so that's why this is important. And so the solution might be, hey, let's just write good software, right? But that's something that's very difficult, right? It's just difficult to write software and get it right the first time. It's really tough to anticipate how users are going to use your software. I mean, anyone that has written software and interface with users has had that experience where they've worked on a feature, they've built something, and they knew that no matter what, when that user was going to get that software in front of them, they were going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think we've all had that moment where we were surprised and realized, wait, that's not how the software was utilized. And so how do you, if that's the reality, how do you write good software? And what a lot of people in the industry and what I believe is that the key to writing good software is to keep at it and to rapidly iterate, right? And so, it becomes important to be able to continue to amend and change software in a very fast manner, right? And this has changed the way we develop software to be able to meet these requirements. And, if you look historically at the methodologies that were used, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the predominant methodology was waterfall, right? And I guess, the overwhelming trait of waterfall was that typically you're releasing maybe monthly or quarterly or even yearly, right? Which if you think about it in terms of cycles, that means if you do it yearly, you get 1 chance a year to update your software, or 4 chances or 12 chances, right? And there has been this shift to a more agile model where instead of having a very long cycle that's very elaborate and in depth, we have rapid short cycles that still cover all the bases, but you're able to deploy and release software maybe many times a day or many times a week or, even, every week, right? Which is still much faster than historically what was used. But in order to meet this change in need, we've had to change the way that software is deployed. And this means not just different process, but it also means different tools. And so, today we're going to talk about 2 of those tools that I think have done a great job in leading the industry and where things have gone and where they are going to go. And those 2 pieces of technology that we're predominantly going to talk about are GitLab and Kubernetes, right? So what is GitLab? So GitLab is a single application platform for the entire DevOps lifecycle. So what that means is it is something that when you think about the journey that code goes through, right? So if you are a software developer, you probably use some sort of planning tool. Maybe it's GitLab, maybe it's something like Jira, but you need to take that plan and those issues and tasks, and you need to write software. You need to commit it somewhere. You need to test it. You need to deploy it. And eventually it ends up in production and your users use it. And then you need to start all over again and go through the cycle all over again, taking into consideration feedback and changes that need to be made, right? And so GitLab becomes that single source of truth for that whole process, right? And so it is a place where not just your developers can work, but also your security teams, your operation teams, your product teams. And this makes it a really powerful tool. And so it becomes really the keys to your SDLC, right? It is the central piece that ties all these things together. It's able to bring well-defined process to your SDLC, which is your software development lifecycle. It's able to become your single source of truth for it. And it becomes your end-to-end build tool. So again, just to recap, because I know not everyone is super familiar with GitLab, but it is your source control management. And that's how most people tend to get started with GitLab. At some point, they end up building out pipelines in GitLab CI/CD, which actually are what happen. And we're gonna go through those a little bit in the demo. But these are actually what get triggered when you make changes to code, right? And so you have this tool GitLab that is where your source code lives. It's where when changes to your source code happen, actions happen, right? So it's very powerful. But there's a couple things that it doesn't do. And it doesn't do these because it's missing the features. It's just, you need multiple tools to be successful today. And what it doesn't do is it doesn't host infrastructure, and it doesn't host application environments, and it doesn't have compute resources. But that's exactly what Kubernetes does. And that's why, I was very excited to put this on and kind of describe how the organizations that we work with take advantage of these two technologies. So for those that don't know, Kubernetes, it's a container orchestration system that's used to automate application deployment and scaling, right? And so really, if you come from a traditional IT background, think of these as your servers, right? It's much more flexible than just traditional hardwired servers, but these are really the key compute building blocks, right? And so it fills that void that GitLab currently has, and probably always will have, because it's really just not meant to be this, right? And so in terms of what we're looking at it for, it's able to be that control plane for your DevOps team. It's able to be that flexible application platform that hosts your environments. And it's a really complex and it's a really powerful tool that enables you to build out your own custom platform as a service functionality in your environment. So I don't know if some of you are familiar with things like Heroku or Elastic Beanstalk. Those are platform as a service, right? And they're great tools, but they're not customized to your own needs. And you have a lack of control in some areas, where with Kubernetes and some very quick configuration, a lot of times you're able to build out some really complex functionality in a repeatable and scalable way. One technology I just want to touch on really briefly is something called Helm. And this is something that helps us to provide some structure around Kubernetes resources, right? So I'm going to put a placeholder here, because during the demo, you're going to hear me talk about this. And I just want to give a little bit of context. So let's talk about the intersection of GitLab and Kubernetes, right? So we know GitLab is this single source of truth for your DevOps, for your software teams. It's where your source code lives. Kubernetes is where ultimately, for a lot of organizations, the code that lives in GitLab is getting deployed to. And so it becomes very important to be able to integrate these two technologies in a secure and scalable and reliable way. And GitLab has done a great job of making this front and center in their tool and giving you different ways to be able to do this. So there's different levels of integrations. For some companies, they are just, they maybe only have a light presence in Kubernetes, and they want to just be able to deploy their GitLab runners, which are what actually execute GitLab pipelines in their cluster. For other organizations, they're going to want a much deeper integration with GitLab Kubernetes Agent, which we're going to go through in our demo as well. And for some companies, they're going to want to have a robust review environment functionality, which again we'll go through in the demo, but I think is one of the more interesting and powerful features when you tie these two technologies together. But for those that aren't ready to kind of take that dive and do that deep integration, I think there's some very quick wins that organizations can get from using Kubernetes with GitLab. So like I mentioned, GitLab CI requires runners to execute its pipelines. GitLab.com has done a great job of providing a ton of shared runners with very generous usage tiers that organizations can use. But a lot of organizations want to own the runners themselves. That is often a result of security concerns, or maybe they just don't want to deal with the usage limits or have very specific needs in terms of the scale and size of those runners. And so they need a solution. Before Kubernetes, or for organizations that don't use Kubernetes, that solution might have been to set up a server, whether that's in a cloud or on-prem, install the runner software and have that be your server, right? But that is something that is pretty laborious in the scale of what we're talking about here. But with Kubernetes, you can actually just use a simple Helm chart, type a few commands, and have on-demand runners that can scale. And it's a very flexible solution that you're able to take advantage of. For organizations that are deploying workloads to Kubernetes already, there's this question of how do you enable GitLab to be able to talk to a cluster and deploy software? And GitLab has created this piece of technology called the GitLab Kubernetes Agent. And this is a great and secure way to be able to give access to GitLab CI to deploy workloads into Kubernetes. It's able to make this a very seamless process. It's very straightforward. We're going to set up a runner, or we're going to set up an agent just in a few minutes. We're going to show how it's used, and hopefully we'll learn something. But I guess the point here is that GitLab has made this very easy to do this in a very secure, repeatable, and reliable way. Before we get into the review apps and the demo, I just want to talk about one more concept, which we're not really going to go into a demo of, but I think it is important, and I always love to kind of spread knowledge about it when I get a chance to, and that's GitOps. And so what GitOps is, it's an extension of DevOps with Git as the single source of truth for your infrastructure automation. So a bunch of words there, but really what this means is for companies that are using infrastructure as code and they're using declarative configuration of their environments, they're still responsible for saying, hey, run this and get my environment up to speed, right? And so things can get out of sync. Sometimes you don't know if what's checked in is what's actually deployed. It's tough to know the current active state of your infrastructure. What GitOps does is it actually auto will run whatever's committed into GitLab. It'll actually have the contents of there be reflected in the target state. And again, we're not going to go into it in the demo, but this is something that the GitLab Kubernetes agent supports out of the box. And it's a really powerful feature that I would encourage you to take advantage of. And again, this just provides a couple of benefits around making it easier to collaborate because you know what's in the repository is what's deployed. It makes it easy to roll back because it's just Git. So you can actually go back to a previous version and it's going to update those changes. And it just allows consistency across environments where you're not concerned with, oh, did they make a change locally and deploy that? No, everything is deployed from the repository, and it's very straightforward. So one of the more complex and I think one of the most powerful things that can come from this integration is the concept of GitLab review apps, right? And so what these really are is these are dynamic environments that are temporary in nature. So if we think about a typical workflow, when developers work on code, they typically have their Git repository, they'll check out a branch, they'll go into that branch, they'll make some changes, they'll push the changes up, and they'll create a merge request. That merge request is assigned to a bunch of people who are in charge of reviewing it. And they need to say, yes, this code is good enough to be merged back into production or into a branch, or no, this doesn't meet our requirements. It's going to introduce a bug. It's going to introduce something we don't want to do. And they need to make the call there. So what review apps do that's really powerful is they actually allow you to see these changes in a running application. So without this, you have to rely on just looking at the code and saying, oh, that seems right. But as we all know, it's very difficult to find bugs, sometimes just looking at code. It's very difficult to know if visually something isn't working. And it can be very difficult just to like mimic complex interactions just from looking at code. And so review apps provide us with a pretty powerful way to go ahead and take a look at those changes, spin them up in a server, and when you're done reviewing those changes, tear them down. Now, I mentioned like bringing up and tearing down, like in a traditional world that would require new server resources that need to be set up and provisioned. It's, again, a laborious process, but with review environments, it's not. This is something that is not possible very easily, at least without Kubernetes. And so we're going to go ahead and demo this right now. So give me a second. I will share my screen and we will go through this. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this is big enough. But I just want to show a couple things. So I have this project here that I created for this demo. It's really a very straightforward project, right? So I just have an HTML page that just has some text here. I have a Docker file that uses Nginx to serve it, just takes that content and just, again, it's just a simple web page, right? I have a set of Helm charts that do a few things. These actually define what the application is, what the container should be, the ingress, some things like that. Again, just some technical details that describe really what the deployment should be when it's deployed. But I just want to show, first off, we have this application, and I want to show everybody a little bit about what it looks like in GitLab. So I have this project here, Kubernetes webinar. This is the same project. And there's this great functionality here where you can actually integrate it with a Kubernetes cluster. So I have an agent already running, but just to show everybody, I'd like to connect a new one. So in order to connect a new agent, you can go to connect an agent here. You should see nothing matching because the only one that exists is already creating. But to create a new one, it's actually very, very straightforward. All you have to do is create this .gitlab agents folder. And we're going to copy this, and we're going to make a new one. And this is going to be, call this one test agent webinar. And here we have a config file, which is totally blank. This is where you could actually do some of those GitOps features that I was mentioning within here, actually in this directory, and define what you want things to look like. But for now, we're just going to have this blank directory, right? So I'm going to bring up my terminal because that's typically how I interact with Git. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to commit. And actually, I'm going to make this bigger for everybody because I know it is very small. Hopefully that's a little better. So I'm going to commit this and just say adding a new agent. Push this to main. And this has pushed. So going back to GitLab, we can see we've updated it. We have this folder here for this test agent webinar. And now we'll go back to the Kubernetes clusters folder. So now we want to connect this agent. So we see here, it detected that we have added a new agent definition, and we want to register it. So it's giving me some access tokens, and it wants me to run this. It wants me to run some Helm commands to actually install this in our cluster. So we use a tool here often called Lens that helps us give some visibility into clusters. This is the cluster we're going to work off of here. And you can see here that we have an agent already here, this demo agent that set up. And we see this sample agent, another one we've set up. But we don't have this one that we called test agent webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and run this command. Hopefully I'm still logged in. And I need to go ahead and log into the cluster. So I'm going to do that real quick, another window, and go from there. All right. So now, let me just make sure I'm using the right cluster. Our cluster, perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and install this agent. That's still not working. So law of demos is everything breaks during the demo. So we're going to take a look here, and we're just going to use this previous agent so we can get through everything today. But if you guys have questions on this when you run through it on your own, just let me know. I'd be happy to walk you through. But occasionally we get run into some demo issues. So now that that agent is connected, you're probably wondering, what does this do, right? So we have this Docker file that we've built, and this is, or this GitLab YAML file, and this defines our GitLab pipelines. So what we have here is we have two stages. We have a stage for build and a stage for deploy. The build pretty much builds this Docker image. The deploy installs the Helm chart. And then we have this thing right here. And this is what actually enables the review environments. And what this does is this says if it's a merge request, then we want to install it to a different location. So right now we're installing to this pre-prod location, which I can show you right now. This gets deployed to this pre-production environment. It says, hello, webinar viewers. Very straightforward website, very simple. So let's say you had a change and you wanted to go ahead and you want to change this. You want to change the content, right? So let's say you want to say this, change this to goodbye, webinar viewers. That was a lot of fun. Okay. So let's go through a simple workflow that would do in our environment. So we have this code. We're going to go ahead and we're going to make a new branch, like I said. So we're going to check on a new branch. We're going to call this made goodbye. It's not a good name, but it's okay. We're going to add all the code here. We're going to commit and said change the text for the webinar. And we're going to commit it. Push this to the branch upstream. And it's going to do a few things in GitLab. Now we're going to go back to GitLab and we're going to take a look. So you can see if you go here, we can see that I push this branch. We're going to create a merge request. So we're just going to go through, leave this all the same. You know, normally you could assign reviewers, give it labels, milestones, all kinds of things, write descriptions, but just for the sake of making this demo brief, we're going to go to create merge request. And what this is going to do is it's going to kick off this other pipeline, right? And so this other pipeline is going to run deploy review. So the original commit ran build, which it's building. And this will build the containers that are necessary. And then it's going to go ahead and deploy. So I'm going to let all that run. It's going to take a couple minutes, but I just want to show what ends up happening because I have some of these that I've already ran through. And so what this does is this creates environments. And so we have these review environments that do different things. So I ran these earlier again so we could have some flexibility here. But you can take a look and said we change this to goodbye. And so again, this is triggered from a different merge request. That merge request is over here, change header to goodbye. And you can see this is the result here. And what's really awesome is this created a ton of new resources. So not only did this create our actual deployments, you can see this is the one that's just spinning up now, started 9 seconds ago. But these are the other ones. And we created our pods. This has created ingresses. So these are actually creating load balancers in our AWS environment. They are changing the DNS to route to these environments, pretty much doing all the plumbing that's needed for us to be able to just make a couple changes and have a brand new environment that does not change existing environments. I mean, you can see here, this is our load balancer controller. You can see that what it's doing, it's actually creating DNS entries that's going to update them on our website so that anyone could access these if those are the routing rules. And so again, I know this is a little technical, but I don't want to understate how powerful this is, that this gives teams the ability to test changes as they are working. And they're able you're actually able to deploy a new environment, send it out to team members, say, hey, can you review this? And they're actually able to click through and see those changes in real time. And again, this is just very, very powerful. And gives team a lot of flexibility. And what's great too is that GitLab gives you this interface where you can actually take a look and see, okay, what are my Kubernetes clusters that are connected, right? what are the environments for this thing, for this application. And when you're done with them, you can go ahead and just stop them. And this will actually tear down those resources so you don't have the permanent overhead of everything there. So we're going to cross our fingers that the timing here is okay. I know the DNS entries take a little long sometimes. So hopefully this works. I should probably wait another minute. But we're going to click on it and see if the DNS updated in time. And it seems like it did. Just have a star here. So there's our change. It's quickly updated. You can see that this one's still there. The pre-prod we had before is still there, totally unchanged. And with this, we have several versions of the same application that are viewable and able to be distributed to anybody. I mean, anybody that's on this webinar can go to this web page right now and see this change and go to this one here too and see that change as well. So that's about it for the demo. I know a bunch of functionality. I'm sure we have some questions. So if I can go back and find my screen, I will stop sharing and we can get to some questions. All right. Cool. Hopefully my sharing is no longer there. All right. So I have a couple of questions here. So the first one is, oh, this is a good one. Does this work in any cloud platform? So yes. One of the great things about GitLab is that it's very flexible. It's able to be used in either on-prem or cloud environments. And Kubernetes itself is an interface. And so it's great that we're able to actually use this GitLab Kubernetes agent in any Kubernetes cluster, whether that's sometimes that might be EKS, which is AWS's option. Sometimes that's Google. Sometimes that's Azure's. It could be Rancher. It could be something you rolled your own. There's plenty of options, but it does work in many different environments. Okay, other question. So the question is that this is the example we gave is very straightforward. Does this work for more complicated deployments? Long story short, yes. Again, that's one of the great things about using Helm, Kubernetes, and GitLab. To use it with a more complicated environment, yes, your Helm charts will be much more complicated themselves, but the interface that GitLab exposes to be able to access these things is very flexible. And so as long as that Helm chart has all the resources needed, so for instance, if you're running a Rails app or a Go app or a Node.js or Django app, as long as you have like the actual application server, the database, whatever resources are needed that are defined in that Helm chart, as long as they're all defined, it can work for very, very complicated deployment. And honestly, that's a lot of what we do as a company is help build out some of those more complex use cases for our clients. Okay, last question I have here is what about the certificate-based integration with GitLab? So for those that are a little familiar with some of this functionality, there used to be a certificate-based way to connect to your clusters from GitLab. It has been deprecated because there were some security concerns with using that method. So now the recommended practice is to use the GitLab Kubernetes agent. If you're an organization that has been using that certificate-based integration and you're looking to get started, hopefully the resource we provided from you here will give you some help in moving forward. But if you need some more help and have a more complicated system, feel free to reach out to us. I'd be happy to talk to you about getting you started on the right path and implementing things a little bit differently. All right, I don't have any other questions in the queue. So go to the next slide. And in terms of next steps, one of the things that we offer at NextLink Labs is we offer value stream workshops. So these are free workshops. We used to charge for them, but we found that we wanted to be able to help more companies that maybe aren't sure if they're willing to invest in some of these areas. And essentially what these are is we help you to walk through your current DevSecOps or SDLC tool chain, understand if all the requirements that we think and industry thinks are best practices are being met, and help you to really identify what the gaps might be in your current process. So they take about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Again, they're totally free, no obligation. We just want to help more companies. And if you're interested in this, please reach out. We'd be happy to schedule something with you. And our company really likes putting on content, so much so that we have 2 webinars in rapid succession. So we have another webinar scheduled for next week, and that is going to be unlocking the power of SAST. So, that's static application security testing. It's part of a lot of companies' build pipelines. We're going to be going through that next week, and in a more in-depth fashion. So if you're interested in that, please sign up. It's on our website. And if you're looking for more updates on future events, we do have a newsletter that we are always keeping everybody up to date on what's going on. And I know GitLab also does a great job of spreading what's going on in our environment as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I know we covered a bunch of topics today, but I hope everybody learned a little bit of something, and I hope everyone will join us next time. Thank you all.